What happens when a decorated war hero, a man who has given his life for his country, is treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin? This story will shock you, inspire you, and make you question everything. The story begins with the return of General James Monroe, a man who has spent over 3 decades serving his country. Known for his bravery and leadership, James earned the respect of his fellow soldiers and the admiration of his superiors. His medals, symbols of his courage, tell stories of sacrifice on distant battlefields, where he fought to protect the very freedoms his nation holds dear. But for James, none of these accolades compare to the simple joy of being home again. After retiring from active duty, James settles back into his quiet suburban neighborhood, a place he's dreamed of returning to during the long years spent away. The community knows him as the quiet, disciplined man who always stops to greet his neighbors and offer a helping hand. However, his proudest role isn't as a general, but as a husband, father, and grandfather. Before we get down to business, we want to hear your opinion. Write to us in the comments, what is your name and from which city are you watching us? Your support is very important to us. We will be grateful if you like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for participating with us in this important project. The moment he steps off the plane, his wife Martha is there, waiting for him with tears in her eyes. She's been his rock through years of separation, and now, they're finally reunited. Their children, now grown, welcome him home with a surprise family dinner. For the first time in years, James sits at the head of the table, surrounded by laughter, love, and the warmth of his family. It feels like a dream, one he fought so hard to make a reality. Over the next few weeks, James adjusts to civilian life. No more early wake-ups for drills, no more barking orders, and no more sleepless nights in foreign lands. Instead, his mornings are spent drinking coffee on the porch with Martha, watching the sun rise over the quiet streets of their neighborhood. His afternoons are filled with walks in the park, conversations with old friends, and small projects around the house. He's at peace. One day, he receives news that fills him with excitement. His grandchildren, whom he hasn't seen in years, are coming to visit. The thought of their tiny arms wrapping around his neck fills his heart with joy. He begins planning their visit down to the last detail, wanting to make it unforgettable. James decides to surprise them. It's a cool evening when he grabs his keys and heads to the store, humming to himself as he drives through the neighborhood. The streets are quiet, lit by the soft glow of streetlights. His mind is on the surprises he plans to pick up: toys for his grandson, a storybook for his granddaughter, and their favorite snacks. For James, this errand is more than just a simple shopping trip. It's a chance to bring joy to his beloved grandchildren, to remind them of how much they mean to him. Little does he know, this peaceful night will soon unravel into chaos, forcing him to confront an injustice far too familiar to many people of his skin color. It's a calm, quiet evening as General James Monroe drives toward the store, humming softly to the rhythm of an old jazz tune playing on the car radio. The road is nearly empty, the only sounds the occasional chirp of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. James smiles to himself, thinking about his grandchildren and the surprises he plans to buy for them. To him, this is just another peaceful night in his suburban neighborhood, a place he thought of often during his years of service overseas. As he approaches an intersection, James notices the unmistakable glare of flashing blue and red lights in his rearview mirror. A police car is following him, its sirens off but its lights demanding him to pull over. His brows furrow in confusion. He's certain he wasn't speeding, and his car registration is up to date. Still, his disciplined nature takes over. He signals, pulls to the side of the road, and parks. As the officer approaches, James instinctively rolls down his window, his hands resting visibly on the steering wheel. It's a habit ingrained from years of teaching his children and grandchildren how to stay safe during traffic stops. But as soon as the officer reaches the car, James notices something unsettling in his tone. "License and registration," the officer snaps, his voice curt and commanding. The officer, a young white man, leans closer, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. James nods and calmly complies, retrieving his documents and handing them over. "Is there a problem, officer?" James asks evenly, trying to maintain respect despite the officer's hostility. "Where are you headed this late at night?" the officer replies, ignoring the question and instead firing his own. His eyes scan James suspiciously, as though searching for a reason to escalate the situation. "To the store," James replies, his voice firm but measured. "Just picking up some things for my grandchildren." The officer smirks, as if he doesn't believe him. "What store? Why are you driving around here at this hour?" His tone is condescending, almost accusatory. James feels a pang of anger rise in his chest. After decades of serving his country, risking his life for its freedom, here he is, being treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood. He takes a deep breath to steady himself before replying, "Officer, I've done nothing wrong. This is my neighborhood, and I'm simply running an errand." But the officer isn't satisfied. His suspicion seems to grow, and his questions become more invasive. "Step out of the car," the officer demands, his hand moving toward his holstered weapon. James' patience wears thin. "Why? What reason do you have to stop me?" he asks, his voice rising slightly. "I've shown you my ID, my registration is valid, and I haven't broken any laws. What is this about?" The officer's expression hardens. "Step out of the car now," he barks, his tone sharp and commanding. Reluctantly, James exits the vehicle, his broad frame towering over the officer. "You don't need to yell at me," he says firmly. "I'm not a threat." But the officer doesn't see it that way. Feeling his authority challenged, he grabs James by the arm and twists it behind his back. The sudden aggression shocks James, who instinctively tries to pull away. "What are you doing?" he shouts, his voice filled with disbelief. The officer forces James against the hood of his car, twisting his arms as he snaps on handcuffs. "Stop resisting," the officer yells, though James isn't resisting, he's simply trying to understand why he's being treated this way. By now, the commotion has drawn the attention of passers-by. A small crowd begins to form, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. "What's going on here?" a woman shouts. "He didn't do anything." Another man steps closer, trying to intervene, but the officer waves him off, warning him to stay back. James, a man who once commanded soldiers in battle, now stands humiliated on the side of the road, his wrists bound in handcuffs. His mind races, not with fear, but with outrage. How could this be happening? How could he, a decorated war hero, be reduced to this, treated like a common criminal for no reason other than the color of his skin? As the officer shoves James toward the back seat of the squad car, the voices of the crowd grow louder. "Let him go," one man shouts. "This is wrong." Some people confront the officer directly, while others continue filming, their cameras capturing every second of this injustice. James glances at the faces in the crowd, hoping someone will speak for him, hoping someone will recognize who he is. Before long, backup arrives, several more squad cars pulling up to the scene. The situation grows tense as additional officers step out, assessing the chaotic scene. James, still restrained, looks up at the approaching officers, hoping for a shred of reason to prevail. And then, it happens. One of the officers recognizes him. "Wait a second," the officer says, his voice filled with shock. "That's General Monroe. Release him immediately." The realization spreads quickly among the officers, and the handcuffs are removed in a flurry of apologies. But it's too late. The crowd has seen everything. The cameras have captured it all. James stands there, his shoulders squared and his pride intact, but his faith in justice deeply shaken. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to show your support. As he's released, the young officer who arrested him mutters an insincere apology. James doesn't respond. He simply walks back to his car, his head held high, even as the weight of the moment presses down on him. He knows this incident is far from over. For James, this wasn't just a traffic stop, it was a reminder of the painful reality that, even as a hero, his skin color can still make him a target in his own country. The next morning, the internet is ablaze. Videos of the incident involving General James Monroe flood social media, uploaded by shocked bystanders who witnessed the injustice. The shaky phone recordings capture everything: the aggressive tone of the young officer, the humiliating way James was forced against the hood of his car, and the moment he was finally recognized and released. The clips, viewed millions of times within hours, spark a wave of outrage across the nation. Headlines begin to appear online: Black War Hero humiliated by police during traffic stop, General James Monroe's arrest exposes ongoing racial bias, and a decorated veteran treated like a criminal. The incident quickly becomes a lightning rod for conversations about systemic racism and police misconduct. Comments on the videos reflect the public's anger and disbelief. How does this happen to a man who dedicated his life to protecting this country? If this can happen to a decorated general, what chance do ordinary black citizens have? This is why we need change. Racism is alive and well in America. As the story spreads, news outlets pick it up, and James' name becomes a trending topic. Veterans organizations express their outrage, issuing statements of support for James and condemning the treatment he endured. Prominent figures from various communities speak out, using their platforms to demand accountability. Meanwhile, within the local police department, the incident creates a firestorm. The department releases a vague statement, calling the event an unfortunate misunderstanding and promising an internal investigation. But for many, this response feels like an attempt to brush the issue under the rug. The pressure mounts as more people demand answers and justice. For James, the aftermath is bittersweet. While he appreciates the outpouring of support, he struggles with the reality that this incident has overshadowed his homecoming. Instead of spending time with his family and planning joyful moments with his grandchildren, he finds himself at the center of a national controversy. In his home, James sits quietly with his wife, Martha, as they watch the news coverage unfold. "You didn't deserve that," she says softly, placing her hand on his. James nods, but his expression is distant. His mind replays the events of the previous night: the officer's hostility, the cold metal of the handcuffs, the humiliation of being treated as a threat rather than a man who had served his country. The calls start coming in. Reporters, activists, and community leaders all want to hear from James. "What are you going to do about this?" one asks. "Will you press charges?" another inquires. James, however, is hesitant. He's never been a man to seek the spotlight, and he certainly doesn't want to be a symbol of division. But deep down, he knows this moment is bigger than him. As the controversy grows, the young officer who arrested James finds himself under intense scrutiny. Internet sleuths uncover his past complaints of excessive force and racial profiling, further fueling the outrage. Protesters gather outside the police station, holding signs that read "Justice for General Monroe" and "End Police Racism." Their chants echo in the streets: "No justice, no peace." James watches the protests from afar, conflicted. He understands their anger, he feels it too, but he also knows that real change requires more than just outrage. It requires understanding, dialogue, and action. Later that evening, James steps outside his home to find a small crowd of neighbors gathered on his lawn. They've come to show their support, bringing signs, flowers, and words of encouragement. "We're behind you, General," one woman says. Another man adds, "What happened to you was wrong, and we won't stand for it." James thanks them humbly, his voice steady but emotional. "This isn't just about me," he says. "This is about every black man and woman in this country who's been treated unfairly. I've fought battles overseas, but this is a battle we need to fight here at home." The next day, James finally decides to speak publicly. He holds a press conference in front of his home, addressing the media, the protesters, and the millions watching online. Dressed in a simple suit with a medal pinned to his lapel, he speaks from the heart. What happened to me was wrong, he begins. But it's not just about me. It's about the countless others who've faced this kind of treatment, those whose stories don't go viral, who don't have the recognition or platform that I do. I stand here today not as a victim, but as a voice for change. We must do better. We must hold ourselves accountable as a nation. His words resonate deeply, drawing applause from the crowd and sparking even more discussion online. James makes it clear that while he seeks justice, he doesn't seek revenge. This isn't about tearing people down, he says. It's about building a better system, one where no one, regardless of the color of their skin, has to fear being treated as less than human. As the chapter closes, James' calm but powerful words mark the beginning of a larger movement. The story is no longer just about one man, it's about a nation grappling with its flaws, its biases, and its need for change. The public outrage over the incident involving General James Monroe reaches a fever pitch. Protests have spread beyond the city, with rallies in major metropolitan areas calling for justice and reform. Social media continues to buzz with hashtags like #JusticeForMonroe and #EndRacialBias, and national news networks air heated debates about systemic racism and policing in America. In the eye of the storm, James remains a steady and dignified presence. But within him is a storm of conflicting emotions. He's torn between his anger at the way he was treated and his desire to de-escalate the tensions that have erupted in the wake of the incident. He knows that his next steps are critical, not just for his own reputation, but for the broader conversation about racial injustice. After days of reflection, James decides to take a path that surprises many. Instead of filing lawsuits or fueling public outrage further, he announces that he wants to meet the officer who arrested him face to face. The news shocks the nation. People wonder, why would a man who was so clearly wronged extend an olive branch to the very person who humiliated him? But James knows exactly what he's doing. He believes that progress doesn't come from perpetuating division, it comes from dialogue, no matter how uncomfortable that dialogue may be. If I want change, he tells his wife Martha, I have to show what that change looks like. We can't fix this without talking to each other. The police department arranges a private meeting between James and Officer Daniels, the young officer who initiated the stop. Tensions are high as the two men sit across from each other in a quiet room at the police station. Daniels looks visibly nervous, his usual confidence replaced with uncertainty. For the first time, he sees James not as a suspect or a statistic, but as a person, an accomplished, principled man with decades of service to his country. James begins the conversation with a disarming calmness. Do you know who I am? He asks. Daniels nods hesitantly. You're General Monroe. No, James says, shaking his head. I'm James. I'm a husband, a father, and a grandfather. I'm someone who spent most of his life fighting for this country, your country, too. But last night, you didn't see any of that. You didn't see me as a person. Daniels shifts uncomfortably in his seat. I was just doing my job, he stammers. It wasn't personal. That's the problem, James replies firmly. It's never personal, is it? But it becomes personal when someone like me, someone who's done everything to serve and protect this country, ends up handcuffed on the side of the road, humiliated in front of strangers. It becomes personal when you look at my skin before you look at my humanity. Daniels sits silently, his gaze fixed on the table. For the first time, he seems to grasp the gravity of his actions. I didn't mean for things to escalate, he says quietly. I made a mistake. James leans forward, his voice steady but intense. This isn't just about your mistake. This is about a system that teaches you to see people like me as threats first and citizens second. Do you understand that? Daniels nods slowly, his face pale. I do, he whispers. And I'm sorry. James doesn't let the moment linger in anger. Instead, he shifts the focus toward resolution. What are you going to do about it? he asks. Apologies are words, Officer Daniels. Change is action. Are you willing to change? Are you willing to be part of the solution? Daniels looks up, his eyes meeting James. I want to be better, he says earnestly. I want to learn. I don't want this to define me, or anyone else. The conversation ends with a handshake, but it's clear that the real work is just beginning. Daniels promises to take part in sensitivity training and community outreach programs, pledging to rebuild trust with the community he serves. James, for his part, agrees to stay involved, offering to speak with officers about his experiences and what accountability and respect truly mean. Outside the station, reporters swarm James, eager to hear about the meeting. Standing tall, he addresses the cameras with the same grace and dignity that have defined him throughout his life. Today wasn't about blame, it was about understanding, he says. We cannot fix what we refuse to face. Officer Daniels and I had a difficult conversation, but it was necessary. Change begins with acknowledging our shared humanity. The public response is mixed. Some praise James for his courage and willingness to seek reconciliation. Others criticize him, arguing that forgiveness lets Officer Daniels and the system off too easily. But James is steadfast in his belief, the only way forward is through peaceful confrontation and constructive dialogue. As the days pass, the ripple effects of James' decision become evident. Community members begin organizing workshops to bridge the gap between law enforcement and citizens. Veterans organizations and civil rights groups come together to call for mandatory racial sensitivity training in police departments across the country. People of all backgrounds, inspired by James' example, begin to have conversations about race, justice, and what it means to truly see each other as equals. For James, the meeting with Daniels wasn't just about resolving a personal grievance, it was about planting a seed of change. He knows the road ahead will be long, but he's willing to walk it, just as he's walked countless battlefields before. And this time, he's fighting for something even greater, a world where his grandchildren, and everyone else's, can grow up without fear of being judged by the color of their skin. In the weeks following the meeting between General James Monroe and Officer Daniels, the fallout from the incident continues to shape the national conversation. Public pressure mounts, and the police department is forced to take decisive action. After a thorough review, Officer Daniels is dismissed from his position due to his repeated complaints of excessive force and racially biased behavior. The announcement brings a sense of relief to many who felt justice needed to be served. James, however, approaches the news with a measured response. This isn't about one man losing his job, he says in a public statement. It's about ensuring that the system that allowed this to happen is held accountable and changed for the better. We don't need just punishment, we need progress. The viral video continues to circulate, sparking discussions in homes, schools, and workplaces across the nation. James' speech and his calm, dignified handling of the situation inspire widespread admiration. For many, he becomes a symbol of grace under pressure and the power of peaceful resistance. As public interest begins to shift, James reflects on the journey he's been on since returning home. He gathers his family together one evening, his grandchildren playing in the living room, unaware of the events that have unfolded. Watching them laugh and play, he feels a renewed sense of purpose. Things are changing, he tells Martha as they sit on the porch together. Maybe not as quickly as we'd like, but they're changing. And if I can play even a small part in making this country better for them, for all of us, then it's worth it. His words echo a deep truth: the fight for justice isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. James knows there will always be challenges, but he also knows that moments like these, where individuals stand up and demand better, are what push society forward. In his final public statement about the incident, James speaks directly to the people. Racial discrimination has no place in our country, and yet it exists, quietly, loudly, and everywhere in between. It's on all of us to challenge it, to confront it, and to work toward a future where everyone is judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. We must stand together, not divided, because change is only possible when we move as one. His words resonate deeply, reminding everyone that progress is a shared responsibility. As James looks forward, he carries the scars of his experience, but he also carries hope, for his grandchildren, for his community, and for a nation striving to become the best version of itself. The chapter closes not with anger or despair, but with hope and determination, a powerful reminder that even in the face of injustice, dignity, and unity can pave the way for change. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to show your support.